Hello and welcome back to the Bird's Eye View podcast. We are here on Tuesday, October 22nd, and we're going to be continuing our series where we look back on the year that was for each of the Toronto Blue Jays minor league affiliates. I'm your host, Zach Worden, joined as always by Jori Negin-Shecter, and we are super excited to be joined by the play-by-play voice of the Dunedin Blue Jays. It is Larry Larson. Larry, thanks so much for taking the time to do this.
Guys, really appreciate the invite and excited to chop it up.
Not only are you the play-by-play voice of the team in Dunedin, but you were also just in Arizona, spending some time calling some games in the Arizona Fall League. How was your time in Arizona with all those guys down there?
Yeah, the fall league is a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that experience. It's definitely a different dynamic, and especially this year, you look at some of the teams around the league out west. There are a good handful of big league guys. So the rosters this year are really interesting, and it's just such a unique dynamic because these days every organization uses the fall league differently. Like in the past and everybody kind of has referred to it traditionally as kind of finishing school for prospects, but really depends organization to organization. You've got some guys who just turned 19 years old out there. You've got other guys who are knocking on the door of the big leagues, and then now you've got some active big leaguers. So it was really unique, and it's just a very relaxed vibe of baseball. So it was really enjoyable.
That's awesome. For the eight Blue Jays down there, you get to play with Jeff McNeil for a couple games as he's rehabbing for the NLCS. So, you never know what you're going to get there.
Well, exactly. I'm sure that had to be a pretty good experience. I think that's one of the best things about the fall league is, especially for the younger players, when you get to be around those older guys and occasionally a guy like Jeff McNeil, it's definitely a big positive.
And
100%.
we'd be remiss if we didn't ask if you had any thoughts on any of the Jays you saw down there. If you did get a chance to catch anyone down there.
Oh man, I only got to see Scottsdale once, unfortunately, and it was when McNeil was in town, one of his two games. And so no Blue Jays were in the lineup there,
Uh,
unfortunately. So ironically enough, I didn't see any Blue Jays action in my time down there. It was kind of unfortunate. I really wanted to see P. Willie and some of those guys, but yeah, maybe next time.
Next time for sure. Let's move on. Let's touch on the Dunedin Blue Jays because what a year it was in Dunedin. They have an interesting crop of guys come through there. Obviously, Arjun Namala, the headliner, finished the year above 500. Like all in all, as much as some of the other affiliates in the Blue Jays organization just had kind of rough years as far as wins and losses go. Dunedin, one of the two to finish above 500. So a pretty decent season from that standpoint. What did your kind of, just your overall takeaways from the year that was with the DJs there?
And I'm glad you brought up the record because I think that's reflective of the culture that the coaching staff really established. Jose Mayorga, the manager, did a really nice job in his first year managing a full season affiliate, and the players really followed his lead, and keeping a kind of a level barometer throughout the season. Never too high, never too low. There was a time where it was really looking like they were going to make the playoffs. When all those new draft picks came in and some of the guys who had been there all year were, kind of on tired legs, and some of those draft picks came on and really brought a rejuvenated sense to the team. But as a whole, you look around the system, I think injuries were a big theme for the system as a whole, especially in Dunedin, especially the pitching staff, the starting pitching. There were so many good, positive flashes, even in April from a guy like Landon Morotis, from Fernando Perez, who was obviously one of the best stories in the system this year. But then Morotis and Barriera going down with TJ in the first month of the season, and then Nolan Perry's emergence was a lot of fun, and him going down with Tommy John. It just really seemed like one thing after another. And I think the characterization comedy of errors would be not exactly on the nose because injuries aren't exactly comical, but at times it felt like that. It felt kind of like, okay, what's next? But that being said, the team just did such a great job, just kind of keep on plugging on and playing good baseball really every month of the year.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. Obviously, the injuries are uh, uh, organization-wide story this year. I think one of the defining stories of the Blue Jays season, just kind of the way that it went across the entire organization. So, of course, Dunedin played or was a big factor in that as well. So, tough going there. But I think another kind of under the radar story is, of course, Arjun Nimala and the headliner of this Dunedin Blue Jays team throughout the year, where he starts the year slow, has his time on the development list, spends some time playing with the team, the complex league team, and then comes back and just kind of sets the world on fire and ends the year as the player of the month there. So I just kind of want to get your thoughts on the year that was from Arjun and kind of what you saw from him before he went on the development list and what he changed when he came back.
With Arjun, I don't think it's just a success story for him, but I think it's a success story for the whole organization with how he came in April and how he started to how he finished the year was so night and day. And that's just such a great example of player development and why it's important to invest in a facility like the player development complex that they have in Dunedin and all the tools that they were able to use with Arjun there, I think really did him well. But you looked in April, and I think the word that comes to mind is overmatched. I mean, this is a guy who he's going to be 18 years old for the entire season. He came in, you could see flashes. I mean, there were swings where, first weekend he took Sawyer Gibson long deep for his first pro homer, and that's a big league pitcher. So you see a swing like that, really easy to get excited, but just felt like he couldn't quite put it all together, especially against spin. Really struggled against breaking balls in those first, month, 2 month stretch. And as a result, I think it was a good thing that the Blue Jays recognized, okay, this is a player that we challenged out of the gate. We need to hit the reset button. And whatever they did, hitting the reset button sure worked because he came back and was a totally different player. He looked advanced for the level. So to go from overmatched in April and May and then coming back in July, or I forgot exactly when it was, mid-July, thereabouts, to look like one of the best players in the league, still as an 18-year-old, still 2 or 3 years younger than the average player in the league. It's just such a great story, and I think one of the things that he really worked on, watching him in the cage was, stability in his lower half, and I think that really helped him, against spin. One thing, if you want to really dive deep into the video, he has a small movement with his back foot that he added when he came back. And it's interesting because you always see guys take strides forward, but for him, in addition to the stride forward, he has just a slight movement with his back foot that allows him to
Interesting.
keep his head and his lower body level. And that really helped him stay on time and stay on pitches and eventually drive pitches because you saw the result at the end of the season. But you really have to credit Arjun. And I think going into the season, what I heard most from the coaching staff and from other players even was, he's 18 years old, but he's really mature and wise beyond his years. He's got kind of this forward-looking mentality of realizing, okay, how was this drill or how is this move in my swing not just going to help me today, but how is it going to help me years down the road? And I think you see that in how he employed some of the things that he did to get to the point that he was at, winning the league player of the month in August. It was just a lot of fun to watch, and he's got a very, very bright future ahead. All the positive reviews I can definitely second those because he's great.
Well, yeah, no, for sure. Seems like he's a guy that it's no accident that he ultimately was, first round pick just a year and change ago. The the thing with Arjun, obviously, he taps into that power, I think, in a big way after he returns from the development complex. And excuse me, he's really got a lot of Blue Jays fans excited. I think it's really the best kind of way to put it. Uh, I guess I would pose to you as someone that's just kind of been around him a little bit more. What about him you think is the most, call it, enticing in terms of his potential big league prospects?
I think it's the athletic ability and the power combined that is somewhat rare to see in baseball. You look at how he moves at shortstop, and it's easy to see him projecting to stick at that position, but also the fact that he's just 18 years old and still has a lot of room to grow. He's got some power projection left if we really want to dive into the scout speak. I mean, he's still young and he can really bulk up. He's still pretty wiry as is right now. And this is a guy who, almost hit 20 homers in his first full season of pro baseball. And I think that's what excites me the most is knowing how much power he has now and how much muscle he has left to put on. The comp I keep hearing internally, from various coaches is like, this guy's Carlos Correa. I mean, you look at the build, and I really think that's a good comp. And I think Arjun could turn out to be a guy like Carlos Correa, solid defender at shortstop, but a guy who can really swing for some juice, especially once he puts on a little bit more muscle. So I think that's definitely what excites me the most.
I'm glad to hear like the comps because it's always fun to kind of have that stuff. I mean, trying to figure out who he was kind of after the draft, and of course there's the Lindor stuff because they're buddies and hang out and work out together, and then Correa and like Alfonso Soriano. So really cool to hear you say the Correa thing there. One thing that for a guy whose 19th birthday was like last week and he's already done his first year of pro ball. It's just incredible to see the development. But you mentioned a little bit the defensive side of the ball and what he's done at shortstop. What did you kind of see from him as far as taking strides at short this year?
I think as the year went on, the game slowed down for him. And I think that was important because there were times in April and May where, there are plays that he makes that really nobody else in the Florida State League can make. But there were also some plays where there was a slight lapse of judgment with where to go with the baseball or, something like that. And I think some of those can kind of be attributed to the fact that he was struggling so much at the plate. There's probably a lot going on upstairs. Once he came back, we saw a lot less of that and a lot more just pure showcase of athletic ability and making all the plays that he needed to make. He was making all the routine plays. He was knowing where to go with the baseball. And he was just really solid. I don't know if he has a gold glove ceiling at shortstop, but, I think he can be definitely an above average defender. I think the one thing is the arm. And I think that's one thing that we'll see develop as he continues to put on muscle, kind of going back to that power point is once he continues to grow into his body, I think that arm will continue to develop. But that is something that will need to, I think, improve if ultimately he does want to stick at shortstop. But again, I've got no reason to believe that he won't continue to improve. Just seeing all the things that were developed from April until early September. But shortstop wise, I mean, he showcases as athletic ability. There was a play that I was going through some highlights after the end of the season that I had clipped up on my computer, and there was a play where there was an inning as a whole where he made three great plays, and they were all different. There was one he was ranging deep in the hole, backhanding, throwing to first. There's another play ranging up the middle towards his glove side, and then there's another play, a little chopper over the mound that just got past the pitcher that he barehanded and threw to first. And I think an inning like that really showcases what he could be at shortstop.
Yeah, really encouraging. Just again to hear from someone that's seen him so closely, that's had the opportunity to see him so much, to hear that there is some projectability there at the shortstop position. Now, the last question, I guess, on Arjun is, obviously Blue Jays fans, even though he's just turned 19, obviously itching to see him at the higher levels. If I gave you the keys to the castle right now, where would you expect him to maybe be next year? And how far do you think, again, as someone that's seen how advanced he was for the level, how far do you think he is from being a Blue Jay?
Man, it's easy to dream, right? And especially after the year that the big league club had, it's easy to really want to be overeager and want to push somebody like Arjun. They were aggressive with him last year, starting him in Dunedin. And I think that's a big part of the reason why he struggled, but ultimately he was better for those struggles. I think he's definitely starting in Vancouver. There's no doubt in my mind that he starts up there. I think they're going to give him some time there, even if he gets out to a hot start in April. But I think the Northwest League specifically is a really unique challenge for hitters because you see the same pitchers over and over and over again. So you get through the league quickly and you see pretty much every arm there is to see within the first month and a half. I think after that first month and a half stretch, it's going to be interesting to see how Arjun handles, I think mid-May into June and July. And if he continues to have the level of success that he's had in single A, I think that's means for a promotion. And I think this is a guy who could easily reach double A or maybe even triple A in September next year. But the challenge of the Northwest League is definitely going to be interesting once those scouting reports kind of get established, after that first time through the league. So I'm excited to see how he handles that because it kind of brings out the best in guys. And ultimately, Arjun is a competitor that we've seen is capable of making adjustments. But as an 18-year-old, obviously young for the league, and he's going to be young for the Northwest League. Sometimes those developments and changes take maybe an extra week, extra month. It really just kind of depends. So I think Vancouver, to sum it up, he's starting in Vancouver next year, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him reach double A or triple A next year. I think he's likely going to be a 40-man guy, by 2026. I think you're looking at maybe mid-season 2026 if I had to put a finger on a specific date.
Sign me up for that timeline. If that's the timeline, I'm here for it. That would be a lot of fun. Obviously, for us being up here in Canada would be very cool to see him get in Vancouver, and I'm sure that market would just absolutely adore him. So it would be really fun to have him in Vancouver. Absolutely. Let's move on because, of course, Arjun Nimmala was not the only player to suit up in Dunedin this year. And I kind of wanted to touch on a guy, we're talking about Arjun and the raw power, but I mean, arguably the guy on the roster who, has maybe the most raw power in the Blue Jay system is, of course, Christian Feliz, a guy with like a 116 max EV this year, second on the team in home runs. What did you see from him, and what do you kind of think the future can be from him? Because, for a dude who's like just as much of like a masher as he is, there's definitely got to be some excitement there for sure.
Oh, the upside is you look at those StatCast numbers that we're so lucky to have in the Florida State League is he had the hardest hit ball in the Florida State League this year, and he had the furthest hit ball in the Florida State League this year. And he was right up at the top of the home run race pretty much all season until he got hurt in August, and that ended his season. So that's the upside. He's another nice development story because at the start of the season, the power was there, but it was almost like an automatic home run or strikeout. The strikeouts are just off the charts. But as the season went along, his swing decisions got a lot better. His patience got a lot better. He started drawing more walks. And granted, his strikeout rate was still very high and way too high to look at something like a promotion, come August. But, in today's game where exit velocities and power are so paramount, this is a player that if you can continue developing the swing decisions, continue developing the walk rate and other metrics like that, he projects easily as a, power over hit DH. I think he can play some first base. His first base defense was solid, right around average. But I don't think he can play anywhere other than first base or DH, kind of long-term projects as a DH. But he was must see every time he stepped into the box because he had power to change the game. And anytime you have a guy like that in your lineup, it's a big advantage. And he was definitely fun to watch. Great personality too, beloved in the clubhouse. So I'll be excited to see him and kind of the next step for him next year. But he's definitely somebody you could consider a project prospect. But he's not a guy that even needs to hit 220 to really have a huge impact. If you get him hitting 200, 210 without sacrificing power and cutting the strikeout rate. I mean, come on, sky's the limit. He is so much fun.
Yeah, just a ton to dream on there. I mean, you obviously look at the exit velos and you laid it out very nicely. There's just so much to look at there as a guy that you would love to, if there was if you were ranking the guys in the Blue Jays organization as a whole as like who you would want to watch take BP, like he's probably in the top two or three. Like it's him, Vlad, and it's a Relvis. I can't really think of anybody outside of those three.
Man, yeah, it's funny you bring up BP because I think I can count with one finger the amount of times we took on-field BP after about June 1st in the Florida State League just because of the weather.
Yeah.
So we kind of missed out on that a little bit, but man, can confirm it was a spectacle in April and May.
Yeah, very awesome. I can't imagine how cool that was for sure. Let's keep on moving. I mean, another story, maybe not kind of in the same vein as Arjun Nimala and Christian Feliz, but of course, Joey Votto spending a lot of time with Dunedin this year. I was in Vancouver for a couple weeks, talked with some of the guys there that were with the Blue Jays, and got to spend some time with Votto. I'm kind of curious. Obviously the on-field stuff is what it is, but what was it like for you getting to cover him and getting to be around him on a day-to-day basis as he was working back as a future Hall of Famer and a guy who obviously had a very large impact on the clubhouse there.
That was probably the most unique thing I've seen in my 3 years in minor league baseball. We had a lot of rehabs this year. I think it was about 35 come the season's end if you combine big league and minor league rehabs. But obviously a future Hall of Famer is a little bit different to have in the clubhouse. So I think at first it was kind of a feeling out period of, okay, what's this going to be like? What's he going to be like? Because he's such a unique and big personality. But at the end of the day, I think everybody came away, having a really positive experience from having him around. It was just the coolest thing because he wasn't just on his own schedule. And so often with rehabbers, they are on their own schedule. They stick to that. They show up to the ballpark at a different time. They hit in the cage at a different time. They lift at a different time. They come out of the game at a different time. So they're really not a part of the team. And although there were some dynamics with Votto and his rehab that were like that, he went out his way and took a lot of time to chat with guys, to watch guys take BP in the cage, to watch guys swing. And I think a great example of that is the relationship that he had with Christian Feliz. Votto, talked hitting with him. I think there was a week stretch where it was almost every day, talking in Spanish, talking hitting. There was one time where, every Saturday home game we have an autograph session, and usually it's players who aren't in the lineup. So I take them out in front of the team store and they sit there for a few minutes. And Christian told me, he's like, "Hey, I gotta leave a few minutes early. I gotta go hit with Joey. Like he's gonna show me something." So just seeing those concrete examples was so cool because it really would have been easy for Votto to show up, do his own thing. Nobody would have questioned it. Nobody would have batted an eye. But he took so much time to coach these guys who are going to be the next generation of baseball in Canada. And I think he's a guy who's a deep thinker and definitely has the foresight to kind of realize that, okay, these are going to be the guys that kids in Toronto and kids across Canada are going to be watching here in a few years. And so it's important, for the next generation to be good, if that makes sense. So it was really a unique thing. He almost became another coach on the coaching staff while trying to, scratch and claw his way back to the big leagues himself. But it was just so neat to watch him talk hitting, talk life, talk minor league baseball with these guys. And that's an experience that they won't forget. And I definitely won't forget either for a long time.
Undeniably unique for sure. Well, I mean, we've had the chance to have a few guests on. We've basically asked most of them if they've got any kind of Joey Votto stories from his time hanging around the minor leagues. And I guess the same goes for you. Do you have any kind of stories to share just with regards to even yourself and Votto or anything that you saw with Votto, even beyond kind of what you already mentioned?
Yeah, man. I didn't have a chance to interact a ton. I mean, we chatted a few times for sure. I just tried to stay out of his way a little bit. Um, but I think one of the crazier moments was it was Fourth of July week. We were in Clearwater, and so before the game, I went down to grab a snack from the clubhouse, and they had the Jays game on. It was Canada Day, I believe, and so they had the game on the TV in the clubhouse, and I walk in, and it was Nick DeShams, Bryce Arnold, and Tucker Toman sitting there watching the game with Joey Votto. And Josh Hader was pitching for the Astros, I think. And um, like Tucker Toman asked him, like, how do you face Josh Hader? Like, what do you do lefty lefty? And just listening to Votto talk hitting with those guys was kind of surreal as somebody who grew up in Illinois watching the Cubs and watching, Joey Votto shred the Cubs, during my childhood. It was like, whoa, this is crazy listening to him talk the nuances of hitting and talking the points of success that got him to, the MVP level that he was at for years and years. So that was really neat, and just seeing how he interacted with guys. I think I did ask him because I try to ask guys who are in the big leagues or who are on rehab or who are close to the big leagues. What would you tell yourself if you could go back in time when you were in Single A? So I asked that to Votto, and he said nothing. And I'm thinking to myself, like, okay. I was like, just like, what do you mean? Like, it's all going to work out? And he said, no, not even that, because I think urgency has been good to me. And I thought about that, and I thought, wow, that's a really good point, because I think in baseball and player development, patience is so often preached. But I think something like that, I think that's poignant. Urgency is important at times of life, and I think that was something that you saw in his rehab and just being around and seeing his dedicated routine day in day out that he stuck to was really neat, and I think that's something that can translate not just to baseball but also to life. So that kind of sums it up for me. It's definitely a surreal few weeks.
Yeah. Unbelievably cool experience, and thanks for the stories. I mean, those are super cool. The Canada Day story where he's hanging out with like two Canadians watching the game. I mean, that's just, it doesn't get better than that, right? So really
Exactly.
really awesome there. Let's keep moving on. Of course, there's so many players, but we're not gonna be able to get to them all. But one guy that I think we got to touch on is, of course, Fernando Perez, the Blue Jays lone representative at the Futures game this year. Had a really nice year with Dunedin, and of course, kind of down the stretch, some injury stuff, like maybe some workload stuff, kind of prevented him from kind of finishing the year the way that he would have liked. But what did you see from him, and what do you kind of think might be the next step for him as a prospect in the Jays system?
With Fernando, so much of it was just strike throwing. The guy who is consistently in the zone, and in Single A, that is just it's a breath of fresh air after some of the pitching that you see. Not specifically with the Blue Jays, but also just around the league. A guy who is as consistently in the strike zone as he is not a common occurrence. I think somebody put it best in an article, from the Blue Jays player development staff. Like, you can't scare him out of the strike zone. And seeing how he adjusted to when the scouting reports kind of came out that, okay, this guy is going to be in the strike zone. You should be ready to hit first pitch. So often you'd see guys swing first pitch, and he wouldn't give up hard contact, even though guys were sitting first pitch, knowing that he was going to be in the zone. And I think that was most encouraging, is how he adjusted to his opponent's adjustments, because in baseball so often it's the cat and mouse game, and adjusting to scouting reports and adjusting to specific hitters, and he was really able to do that so well. So he's kind of cerebral in that sense, I think. The velocity was good. The velocity was strong, a little bit better than advertised. And it's ironic, the Futures game, such a cool moment for, such a cool story like Fernando, who doesn't really come from a baseball country, really a unique scouting find for the Blue Jays, goes and pitches in the Futures game. He comes back. He just could not find that rhythm again. The Futures game, I don't know what it was, completely threw him off. And it was an injury. It was just more, I think, arm fatigue. And with the year that the Blue Jays had pitching wise around the system, I think everybody played it maybe overly cautious, which totally get that. And that's not a guy that you want to have get injured, considering you look at the laundry list of the other guys that got hurt throughout the year. That was definitely understandable. But the future is so bright for a guy like Fernando. Wouldn't be surprised to see him start the year off in Dunedin again. But we'll see. He's definitely on pace to make that jump up to Vancouver, maybe to start the year, but definitely at some point in 2025. But just a really encouraging season from him. And I think the last thing with the injury or the fatigue factor is you take into account that he was already well past his career high in innings for the season. You figured that a shutdown was coming eventually. So the whole ending to the season wasn't a huge red flag for me. But definitely I understand why people were so scared, for lack of a better term, about it.
Yeah, for sure. You touched on it a few times here. You've alluded to it, but obviously the injuries to Landon Morales, Brandon Barea, obviously huge storylines in terms of the season is sticking with the pitching. But before those injuries, even in terms of the brief kind of glimpses that you got of them, what were your impressions of them? What kind of year did you think they were set up to have?
With Brandon, to start with him, it was really exciting because he was kind of the headliner of the pitching staff that, everybody around the system, internally, externally, that everybody was excited about to see a full season out of him. I mean, you see what he did in the spring breakout game, touching 95, 96, 97, a lot of strikes. You kind of saw the upside in a slight glimpse, even though it was just one inning. And so he was a guy I was really excited to watch. But granted, only got 1 1/3, I think it was 1+. That was just brutal to watch, man. Just knowing that, he's a guy who's dealt with injuries in the past and has worked so hard to stay in shape. And that was one thing that I heard from the coaching staff before the season started was this is a guy who's dedicated himself to the weight room. He's dedicated himself to conditioning, and he's dedicated himself to the routine of it all. And he carried himself like a guy who had been in, full season pro ball for, a few years, even though it had only been really a year for him. So it felt like this was the year where it was all going to come together. And then, of course, he only lasted one full inning, and it ended with him spiking the baseball with his right arm behind the mound. And anytime you see a reaction like that, it's heartbreaking, really. That's what it is. With Landon, the stuff that we saw from Marotis in April, dude. I mean, the upside is incredible. The breaking ball, both the slider and the curveball are just gross. And I think for him, you saw him after the first month, and I thought, man, if there was no Ricky Tiedemann in the system, this is a guy who could be the organization's best pitching prospect. So that's the type of player that we're talking about when he's all healthy. Coming back from Tommy John is always a big question mark. It's no sure thing, but with modern technology, I think we've seen more often than not, guys do come back to their former selves. So I'm interested to see how Landon recovers, but what stands out the most is, for a player like Marotis, he split so much time between pitcher and shortstop in high school. And so he still has the athletic ability of a shortstop. And that's what's really exciting for his development is I think that can be a tool for him moving forward once he does come back from Tommy John. So, with pitchers, you don't always think athletes, but when I think Landon Morotis, I think a pitcher who is an athlete, and that's somewhat unique in today's game. So, really excited to see what those two can bring to the table once they come back. Um, but what we saw from Morotis out of the gate was so exciting, and that's what made the injury so disappointing and another heartbreaker for sure.
Heartbreaker is a great way to put it. Very, very tough for both of them, where I think the expectations were fairly high for both of them to kind of have the breakout seasons, but obviously unfortunate the injuries fall the way that they do. One thing, excuse me, one thing I did want to ask you about, and there's too many of them to get into all of them, was the guys that got there after the draft. And I think when you look at the debuts that like Aaron Parker, Eddie Micheletti, Sean Keys, Nick Mitchell, Brock Tibbetts, J.R. Freedy, like all these guys had once they got there, like it seemed like they all had individual moments, all had stretches where they contributed there. But I'm gonna let you pick your favorite player to watch, or I don't want to make you pick favorites, pick between all of them, but if there's one guy that you could highlight from that draft group going forward, who would that be?
Just first and foremost, I really enjoyed those guys around as presences and as guys to talk to. They're all big, unique personalities, kind of in their own right. So I really enjoyed that aspect as somebody who's a sucker for obviously stories on the broadcast and anecdotes. Those guys gave me a lot, so I appreciate them for that. And not that the guys who were there before didn't, but definitely some big personalities that came in the draft, and I think the Blue Jays did a really nice job kind of um, nailing down the makeup side of this draft class. So a tip of the cap to them on that. But one guy I think that really comes to mind that really was a spark in the lineup was Aaron Parker. Kind of a unique build, kind of a human bowling ball, just a muscular but not very tall hitter. But man, he can whip the bat through the zone, get the barrel through quickly. He could reach a lot of balls. He could hit to all fields for power. So the bat is there. Now I think the focus for Parker, if he wants to reach a potential big leagues, is I think the defense. Defense right now is solid, but I think that's something that probably needs to take a step forward if he does want to reach the big leagues, on that catching side. But his bat was really impressive for a guy who played mid-major college baseball. And I watched a lot of mid-major college baseball when I was in college, so I am definitely an advocate for mid-major conferences, baseball, basketball, FCS football, whatever you have it. But obviously, it's not the SEC, it's not the ACC in terms of pitching. So to see him and adjust so quickly to professional pitching was a big plus. So it'll be interesting to see how his development continues behind the plate. You mentioned Eddie Micheletti. His approach at the plate was really strong, walked almost more than he struck out. And that was one thing that was consistent looking at the numbers from all the hitters in this draft class, is the Blue Jays kind of had a type. And they said, apparently, we're going to go out and we're going to draft as many guys who walked more than they struck out as possible in terms of college hitters. And they really did. And I think he saw that approach translate to single A, which a lot of these guys, at the end of the day, they played in college conferences that, were maybe more advanced than high-level single-A pitching. So I think next year is always the big barometer, first full season, to see how that goes. Nick Mitchell, I thought, was really good. He's kind of your prototypical leadoff hitter type. He'll work a count, but he can also pounce on the first pitch and hit a home run. His power was a little bit better than advertised, and making that transition from a metal bat to a wood bat and adding power, it's almost unheard of, but Nick did it. And a guy who might be a little under the radar, who I think has some really good potential, is J.R. Freedy. He is a guy who played a really, really strong middle infield, even though he played almost all outfield during the college season. I asked him, like, dude, you look great at shortstop. Like, how much shortstop did you play in college? He's like, Yeah, not a lot of it, but he looks like a natural shortstop. He's great at second base. He's got a good enough arm to play the outfield. Um, if his bat continues to come around, I think he's a guy that could project as a super utility guy and have a lot of value. So I'm glad you bring him up, but it's a really exciting draft
Yeah.
class, especially there's some upside in terms of the approach at the plate.
Yeah, for sure. I think when I wrote kind of the post draft article or whatever, I was like, stop me if you've heard this before, but another guy who has a good approach at the plate kind of thing, like stuff like that. So really fun group, and it'll be kind of fun to see how they develop. One thing we've been asking as we've gone through, each of these year in review podcasts is of each guest we've asked, if they could plant their flag on one player as a former major leaguer. And I mean, you can take a guy that we've mentioned so far, or you can kind of go off the board. But I mean, if you had to plant your flag for one or two guys on this Dunedin Blue Jays team that will be a future major leaguer for the Blue Jays or somewhere else, I guess at one point, who would that be?
Man. I think the guy that we spent, 10 or 15 minutes talking about would be a good place to start. Mr. Namala. I think he has got all-star upside. I really do. Just seeing what he's got right now and what he can add to it is really impressive. So I'm starting with Mr. Namala. I've got him as a big leaguer. I feel like that's a pretty safe bet.
I'm glad you
First
said
rounder.
it.
Yeah, just making sure in case our discussion earlier wasn't enough to lead us to that conclusion. I'm trying to think of some other guys because there are a few that I could kind of point to. Man. I'm gonna go off the beaten path here. There are a few guys on the beaten path that I could go to. But I'm gonna go Kai Peterson, a guy who started the year with us in the bullpen. His stuff is really good, and you want to talk about, putting guys in specific roles in the bullpen. He is a guy that could be a specific left-handed pitcher out of the bullpen to get out left-handed batters. He also has the upside of a closer type, especially if he continues to add velocity. But I really like his upside as somebody who can get out lefties out of the bullpen, get out of jams. He's got the makeup to be a closer type. I'm a really big fan of Kai Peterson. So there's two. One kind of obvious, another maybe a little off the beaten path, but I'll go with Namala and Peterson.
I like it. I like it. I mean, a dude who has like a 43% K rate. I mean, that's a pretty good pick to me. It's really really cool the year that he had for sure. All right. Well, Larry, we took up a little bit more of your time than I said we were going to. Really appreciate you taking the time to do this. It was a lot of fun. Was a lot of fun listening to you on the broadcast this year, and we're looking forward to kind of getting to hear you call again next year with the team down there in Dunedin.
Yeah, guys, really appreciate the invite. Thanks for having me, Zach, Jori. Appreciate your guys' work, and we'll talk soon for sure.
Absolutely. Really appreciate it. That is Larry Larson. You can follow him on Twitter at MLB Larry. Of course, he is the play-by-play voice of the Dunedin Blue Jays, and he was just in Arizona calling some Arizona Fall League games. That is going to do it for us here today at the Bird's Eye View podcast. Make sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons if you're watching on YouTube. You can find us there at the Bird's Eye View Pod. If you're watching along on the podcast provider of your choice, make sure to drop a follow and review. If you want to shoot us an email for any mailbag questions or any topics you want us to tackle, you can email us at birdseyeviewpod@gmail.com. And of course, you can follow us all on Twitter. The pod is at BEV_pod. Jori is at Negin-Shecter, and I am at Worden_Zach. Thank you very much for listening.